The gunshot's echo faded into the vast Arizona desert as Abigail Morgan lowered her father's revolver, her hands trembling but her eyes dry. The year was 1885, and she had just buried the last person who had ever promised to stay. "I will protect you forever," her father had said before consumption claimed him, just as it had taken her mother 3 winters prior. Forever, it seemed to Abigail, was nothing but a cruel joke whispered by those destined to leave. She sold their struggling ranch outside Tucson for barely enough to cover her father's medical debts and a stagecoach ticket to Silver Creek, a growing town where her father's old Army friend had offered her work at his hotel. The revolver and her mother's gold locket were all she kept of her former life. The stagecoach journey was long and dusty, the Arizona territory stretching endlessly around her. Fellow passengers tried making conversation, but Abigail remained silent, 22 years old and already weary of people's empty promises. Silver Creek appeared on the horizon like a mirage, wooden buildings rising from the desert floor. The coach lurched to a stop outside Hamlin's Hotel, a 3-story wooden structure that dominated the main street. Miss Morgan, a portly man with a gray mustache, approached as she descended. "Walter Hamlin, I served with your father in the cavalry. Sorry to hear about his passing." Abigail nodded curtly. "Thank you for the position, Mr. Hamlin. Room and board plus wages. You'll manage the front desk, keep the books." He gestured toward the hotel. "Not charity, mind you. Your father said you were sharp with figures." "I am." Abigail straightened her travel-worn dress. "When do I start?" Within a week, Abigail had organized Hamlin's chaotic ledgers and established herself as efficient and unsmiling. The hotel guests learned quickly that Miss Morgan wasn't one for idle chatter or flirtation. She worked from dawn until dusk, returning to her small room on the 3rd floor only to sleep. Silver Creek was growing rapidly with the recent silver strike in the nearby mountains. Miners, merchants, and drifters filled the hotel, and with them came whispers of bandits prowling the trails between towns, making off with silver shipments and leaving bodies in their wake. The town's sheriff, a man named Wilkins who spent more time at the saloon than his office, seemed incapable of addressing the growing danger. Stagecoaches arrived with armed guards, and the miners traveled in groups, rifles loaded. It was during a particularly busy evening in late October that Abigail first encountered him. The lobby doors swung open, bringing with them a swirl of dust and the silhouette of a tall man. His spurs clinked against the wooden floor as he approached the desk, removing his hat to reveal sun-weathered features and eyes as blue as the desert sky after rainfall. "Evening, madam. Name's Daniel Blackwood. Heard you might have a room available." His voice was deep but gentle, with the slightest hint of a southern drawl. Abigail barely looked up from her ledger. $2 a night, includes breakfast, payment in advance." He placed 3 silver dollars on the counter. "I'll take it for 2 nights if you please." She finally glanced up, taking in his appearance more fully. He wore no gun belt, unusual for a man traveling alone, but the set of his shoulders suggested he was no stranger to handling himself. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and despite the dust of travel, there was something immediately different about him from the usual drifters. "Room 7, top of the stairs, end of the hall." She pushed a key across the polished wood. "Breakfast is served from 6 to 8. We lock the doors at midnight." Their fingers brushed as he took the key, and Abigail quickly withdrew her hand. "Much obliged, Miss Morgan. Abigail Morgan." She returned to her ledger, conversation over. Daniel Blackwood nodded, the hint of a smile playing at his lips as he gathered his saddlebag and headed up the stairs. Abigail found herself watching him go, curious despite herself. There was a quiet confidence in his movements, different from the swagger of cowboys or the nervous energy of gamblers. She'd become adept at categorizing men during her months at the hotel, but Blackwood defied easy classification. That night, after locking the hotel doors, Abigail was returning to her room when she passed the small parlor and noticed Blackwood sitting alone, reading by lamplight. He looked up as she passed, closing his book, a volume of poetry she couldn't identify from the doorway. "Miss Morgan," he acknowledged with a nod. "Fine establishment you run here. Mr. Hamlin owns it. I just keep it organized." She hesitated in the doorway, unsure why she was even engaging in conversation. "Organization is the foundation of any successful venture," he smiled. "I noticed your ledgers, beautifully kept." Abigail blinked, surprised by the observation. "Thank you, it's just arithmetic." "Never was my strong suit," he admitted, "though I do appreciate those who have the talent for it." His eyes held hers for a moment too long, and Abigail felt an unexpected warmth creep into her cheeks. "If you need anything, Mr. Blackwood, ring the bell at the desk." She turned to leave. "Actually," he said, causing her to pause, "I was wondering if you might recommend somewhere in town to get a decent meal tomorrow. I have some business to attend to, and I'll likely miss breakfast. Sullivan's across the street serves good food. The mining office is down at the end of Main Street, if that's your business." A curious expression crossed his face. "What makes you think my business is with the mining office?" "Most men who come through here either work the mines, invest in them, or are passing through to somewhere else entirely. You don't have the hands of a miner, and you've paid for 2 nights, so you're not just passing through." He laughed softly, genuinely impressed. "Quite the detective, Miss Morgan." Abigail felt a strange flutter in her chest at his laugh. She silenced it immediately. "Good night, Mr. Blackwood." The next morning, Blackwood was gone before breakfast, just as he'd said. Abigail found herself glancing at the door throughout the day, a fact that irritated her to no end. She'd long ago decided that attachment was a fool's game, yet here she was, wondering about a stranger who would be gone tomorrow. The day passed with its usual parade of guests and problems to solve. A leaky pipe in room 3, a complaint about noise from the saloon next door, a drunk miner who needed to be escorted out. By evening, Abigail was tired and looking forward to the quiet of her room. She was just about to hand over the desk to the night clerk when the doors burst open. 2 men carried a third between them, blood soaking his shirt. "Need help," one shouted. Ambush on the North Trail. Guests gathered in the lobby as the injured man was laid on a sofa. Abigail rushed forward with clean linens from behind the desk. "Someone fetch Dr. Wilson," she ordered, pressing the cloth against the man's shoulder wound. "Already gone for him," one of the men said. "Bandits hit us about 5 miles out. Would have got us all if not for that stranger." "What stranger?" Abigail asked, maintaining pressure on the wound. "Don't know his name." "Tall fella, riding a buckskin horse. He came out of nowhere when they attacked, drove them off." The doors opened again, and Daniel Blackwood entered, supporting another wounded man. His own shirt was torn at the shoulder, revealing a bloody graze. "This man needs help too," he said calmly, helping the miner to a chair. "Bullet just nicked his side, but it needs cleaning." Abigail stared at Blackwood. "You're hurt as well." He glanced at his shoulder as if noticing it for the first time. "It's nothing, doctor." Wilson arrived moments later, taking charge of the situation. As he worked on the seriously wounded man, Abigail approached Blackwood, who had stepped back from the commotion. "Let me see your shoulder," she said, no room for argument in her tone. Surprisingly, he complied, following her to a quiet corner of the lobby. She gathered fresh water and clean cloths, then carefully pulled back the torn fabric of his shirt. "These men say you drove off the bandits," she said as she cleaned the wound. "I happened to be in the right place at the right time. With no gun," she nodded toward his hip, still conspicuously lacking a weapon. A small smile played at his lips. "I never said I didn't have a gun, Miss Morgan. I just don't wear it openly." She raised an eyebrow but continued tending his wound. It was indeed just a graze, though it had bled enough to soak his shirt. "You still haven't told me what business brings you to Silver Creek, Mr. Blackwood." Her fingers worked efficiently, but she was keenly aware of his proximity, the warmth of his skin beneath her hands. "Perhaps I'm hunting bandits," he said quietly, Abigail's hands stilled. "Are you a lawman, of sorts?" He met her gaze steadily. "I work for the Pinkerton Detective Agency. The mining company hired us to investigate the recent robberies and find out who's behind them." She resumed cleaning his wound, processing this information. "Our sheriff won't like that. Your sheriff is either incompetent or involved. 3 shipments have been hit in 2 months, all with inside information about routes and timing." Abigail finished bandaging his shoulder. "There, you should have Dr. Wilson look at it properly when he's done." Blackwood caught her hand as she withdrew it. His touch was gentle but firm. "Thank you, Miss Morgan." Something in his eyes made her breath catch. For a moment they stood frozen, connected by more than just his hand around hers. "You're welcome," she finally managed, pulling away. "If you'll excuse me, I need to help the doctor." The next few hours were chaos as the wounded were treated and statements taken. Sheriff Wilkins eventually showed up, looking annoyed at being pulled from the saloon. When Blackwood quietly identified himself as a Pinkerton agent, the sheriff's face darkened. "We don't need no Pinkertons here," he growled. "This is my jurisdiction." "The mining company disagrees," Blackwood replied evenly. "I'm not here to step on toes, Sheriff, just to stop the robberies and killings." The tension between the men was palpable. Abigail, watching from across the lobby, felt certain the sheriff was hiding something. His eyes darted nervously, and he kept wiping his brow despite the cool evening air. It was past midnight when things finally quieted down. The seriously wounded man had been moved to the doctor's office, the others to their rooms. Abigail was exhausted but too wired to sleep. She found herself in the hotel kitchen making tea. "Mind if I join you?" Blackwood's voice came from the doorway. She should refuse, maintain the professional distance she'd cultivated with all guests. Instead, she found herself reaching for a second cup. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked as he sat across from her at the small table. "Too much on my mind." He accepted the tea gratefully. "Those bandits knew exactly when and where to hit that wagon. Someone's feeding them information." "You suspect Sheriff Wilkins?" It wasn't a question, but he nodded anyway. "He's one possibility, but it could be anyone connected to the mining operation or the shipping schedule." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, steam rising from their cups. "Why did you become a Pinkerton?" Abigail finally asked. Daniel considered the question. "After the war, I was adrift, fought for the Union, came home to Kentucky to find everything changed. The agency offered a purpose, a chance to uphold some kind of justice." "You believe in justice?" There was a skepticism in her voice that made him look at her more closely. "I try to. World makes it hard sometimes." He studied her face in the lamplight. "What about you, Miss Morgan? What brought you to Silver Creek? Necessity?" She stared into her tea. "My parents died. I had nowhere else to go. I'm sorry." His voice was soft with genuine sympathy. "Don't be. We all lose people eventually." Her tone was matter of fact, but Daniel heard the pain beneath it. "Is that why you keep everyone at arm's length?" Abigail's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "You don't know anything about me, Mr. Blackwood." "I'm a detective, Miss Morgan. Observation is my profession." His gaze was gentle despite his words. "You're efficient, intelligent, and kind when necessary, but you don't let anyone close. You watch the door but never walk through it yourself. That's presumptuous. Perhaps," he sipped his tea, "or perhaps I recognize the look of someone who's lost faith in people." Abigail stood abruptly. "It's late, Mr. Blackwood. I should retire." He rose as well, respecting her withdrawal. "Of course. Thank you for the tea and the conversation." At the kitchen door, she paused. "How long will you be staying in Silver Creek?" "Until I catch them. A week, maybe more." She nodded, not looking at him. "Good night, then." "Good night, Miss Morgan." Abigail lay awake long into the night, replaying their conversation. How had this stranger seen through her so easily, and why did it matter what he thought of her at all? The next morning, Blackwood extended his stay indefinitely. Abigail told herself she was merely curious about his investigation, that her interest was professional. But when he stopped by the desk each evening to exchange observations about the day, she found herself looking forward to those brief conversations. He never pushed too hard or asked too much, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, Abigail began to let her guard down. She found herself sharing small details about her life, her love of reading, her skill with numbers, memories of the ranch where she grew up. In turn, he told her about his travels as a Pinkerton, the places he'd seen and people he'd met. He had a way of telling stories that made her laugh despite herself, painting vivid pictures of bustling Chicago or the rugged Montana wilderness. A week passed. Then, too, Daniel became a familiar presence in Silver Creek, talking with miners and merchants, observing the comings and goings at the saloon and the sheriff's office. Abigail found herself keeping track of who he spoke with, noticing patterns in the town she'd never seen before. One evening, as she was closing the ledger, Daniel approached the desk with unusual urgency. "I need your help," he said quietly. "There's going to be another shipment tomorrow, a big one. I think they're planning to hit it at Coyote Pass." Abigail glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "How do you know?" "Been watching the telegraph office. Got a look at a message the sheriff received today. I need someone trustworthy to help me set a trap." "Why me?" His eyes were serious. "Because you're the only person in this town I'm certain isn't involved." Abigail hesitated. Getting involved meant risk, meant caring about something beyond her immediate survival. It meant trusting this man she'd known for barely 2 weeks. "What would I need to do?" Relief crossed his features. "Not much. Just carry a message to the mining office tomorrow morning about a change in the shipment route. Make sure you're seen by the clerk. Watson, I think he's our leak. And then I'll be waiting at the real location with a few men I trust from the mining company. We'll catch them in the act." The plan was simple enough, but Abigail felt a twist of anxiety. "Be careful, Mr. Blackwood. These men have killed before." Something softened in his expression. "I will, and Abigail." It was the first time he'd used her given name. "Thank you for trusting me." The next morning, Abigail delivered the false message as planned. Watson, a thin man with nervous eyes, definitely reacted when she mentioned the new route. By mid-afternoon, she was back at the hotel, anxiously watching the clock and jumping at every sound. Hours passed with no word. The sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Abigail found it impossible to focus on her work, her mind constantly straying to the dusty trail where Daniel might be facing armed bandits. Just after nightfall, the hotel doors burst open. 2 miners carried Daniel between them, his shirt soaked with blood, his face pale. "Get the doctor," one shouted. Abigail's heart seemed to stop. She rushed forward as they laid him on the same sofa where the wounded miner had been treated weeks before. "What happened?" she demanded, already pressing clean towels to the wound in his side. Ambush went wrong, one miner explained. They were waiting for us instead of the other way around. Blackwood took a bullet meant for me. Daniel's eyes fluttered open, finding Abigail. Watson wasn't the only leak, he managed, his voice weak. Sheriff Wilkins, he's their leader. Don't talk, she ordered, fear making her voice sharp. Save your strength. His hand found hers, squeezing weakly. Had to, come back, promised I'd be careful. Tears blurred Abigail's vision as Dr. Wilson arrived and took over. She was ushered aside, Daniel's blood staining her hands and dress. The next hours were the longest of her life. Dr. Wilson extracted the bullet and stitched the wound, but infection was the real danger. Daniel drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring incoherently, sometimes lying so still Abigail had to watch for the rise and fall of his chest to ensure he still breathed. Mr. Hamlin insisted they move Daniel to Abigail's room, as it was the quietest and most private in the hotel. She gave it up without hesitation, setting up a cot for herself beside the bed. For 3 days and nights, she barely left his side, cooling his fever with damp cloths, spooning broth between his lips when he was lucid enough to swallow. Dr. Wilson came regularly, his expression growing more hopeful with each visit. The fever's breaking, he announced on the morning of the 4th day. He's strong. I think he'll pull through. Abigail nearly collapsed with relief. She hadn't realized until that moment how deeply she'd come to care for this man, how terrified she'd been of losing him. Later that day, Daniel woke fully for the first time, his blue eyes clear as they focused on Abigail, who was dozing in a chair beside the bed. "You look terrible," he said, his voice hoarse but stronger than it had been. She startled awake, then laughed through sudden tears. "That's a fine thing to say to someone who's been keeping you alive." His hand reached for hers, and this time his grip was firm. "Thank you, Abigail." "Don't thank me yet. Sheriff Wilkins is still out there and half his gang with him." Daniel's expression darkened. "We got 3 of them. The others scattered when the shooting started, but you're right, it's not over. Don't even think about getting out of that bed," she warned. "Dr. Wilson says you need at least a week of rest." "A week," he grimaced. "Wilkins could be in Mexico by then." "He won't run," Abigail said confidently. "His power is here. Besides, the mining company has telegraphed for federal marshals. They'll be here in a few days." Daniel relaxed slightly. "You've thought of everything." "Someone had to while you were busy bleeding and babbling nonsense." His eyebrows rose. "What kind of nonsense?" Abigail felt her cheeks warm. "Nothing important." In truth, during his fever, Daniel had spoken of her fragments of sentences about her eyes, her smile, how he'd never met anyone like her. She dismissed it as delirium, though a part of her had treasured each word. Over the next week, as Daniel regained his strength, something shifted between them. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal. He told her about his family in Kentucky, a younger sister he supported, parents long dead. She shared memories of her mother's garden and her father's stories, things she hadn't spoken of since their deaths. One evening, as twilight painted the room in soft shadows, Daniel sat up in bed for the first time, watching Abigail as she arranged fresh flowers on the dresser. "Why Silver Creek?" he asked suddenly. "Of all the places you could have gone after your father died, why here?" Abigail turned, considering the question. "It wasn't really a choice. Mr. Hamlin offered a position and I needed one. I had nowhere else." "And now, would you stay if you had a choice?" She hesitated. "I don't know, I've never thought about it." "That's not true," he said gently. "I think you've thought about leaving many times. You just don't believe there's anywhere better to go." Abigail stared at him, unsettled by his perception. "What about you?" When this is over, you'll move on to the next case, the next town. Something unreadable crossed his face. Perhaps, unless I found a reason to stay. The air between them seemed to thicken. Abigail looked away first. You should rest. Dr. Wilson says you can try walking tomorrow. But the moment stayed with her as she lay on her cot that night, listening to Daniel's steady breathing. Was he suggesting what she thought? And if he was, what did it matter? People left. That was the one constant in life. The federal marshals arrived 3 days later, bringing news that turned the town upside down. Sheriff Wilkins and his remaining men had been captured trying to rob a bank in Tucson. The conspiracy had been larger than anyone suspected, involving not just the sheriff but several prominent businessmen in Silver Creek. As Daniel's strength returned, he worked closely with the marshals, providing evidence and testimony. Abigail found herself involved as well, her meticulous records of hotel guests proving valuable in tracking the bandits' movements. 2 weeks after he'd been shot, Daniel was well enough to move back to his own room, though he still tired easily. Abigail returned to her regular duties, but found herself missing their quiet evenings together. The case was wrapping up. Soon, there would be no reason for him to stay in Silver Creek. The thought filled her with a hollow feeling she refused to examine too closely. One afternoon, as she was working at the front desk, Daniel appeared, dressed in his traveling clothes for the first time since his injury. "Going somewhere?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Just for the day. Need to send some telegrams and finish my report." He hesitated. "Would you have dinner with me tonight, to celebrate the case being solved?" Abigail hesitated. Dining together publicly would signal something to the town, a relationship beyond hotel keeper and guest. "Unless you'd rather not," he added, misinterpreting her silence. "No, I would like that," she found herself saying. "What time?" His smile was worth the flutter of anxiety the invitation caused. 7, I'll meet you here." The day dragged endlessly. Abigail found herself taking unusual care with her appearance, wearing her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the amber flecks in her brown eyes, and arranging her hair more elaborately than usual. At precisely 7, Daniel appeared in the lobby. He'd had a haircut and a shave, and his blue eyes widened appreciatively when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Abigail felt herself blush. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Blackwood." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" "I've reserved a table at the new restaurant that opened last month." The Silverado was the finest establishment in town, with tablecloths and actual glass windows instead of oiled paper. Heads turned as they entered, curious glances following them to their table. "Everyone's staring," Abigail murmured as they sat down. "Let them," Daniel replied. "I'm having dinner with the most interesting woman in Silver Creek. They're just jealous." The meal was the most enjoyable Abigail could remember having in years. Daniel was attentive and charming, making her laugh with stories of his more unusual cases and listening intently when she spoke. For a few hours, she forgot about ledgers and hotel guests, about loss and loneliness. After dinner, they walked along the main street, the stars brilliant overhead. Silver Creek was quiet at this hour, most activity centered around the saloons at the far end of town. "When do you leave?" Abigail finally asked the question that had been hanging between them all evening. Daniel stopped walking, turning to face her. "I've been asked to stay on. The mining company wants to hire me as their head of security." Surprise and an unexpected joy flooded through her. "And will you accept?" "I'm considering it." His eyes held hers in the starlight. "There are compelling reasons to stay in Silver Creek." Abigail's heart thundered in her chest. "Such as?" Instead of answering, he reached out, his fingers gently touching her cheek. "May I?" she nodded, not trusting her voice. His kiss was gentle, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Abigail found herself leaning into it, her hands resting lightly on his chest as the world seemed to shift beneath her feet. When they parted, she was breathless, her carefully constructed walls crumbling beneath the tenderness in his eyes. "That," he said softly, "is my reason." Back at the hotel, they lingered in the empty lobby, reluctant to end the evening. Daniel held both her hands in his expression more serious than it had been all night. "Abigail, I need to be honest with you. I've never felt this way about anyone before. These past weeks, getting to know you. It's changed something in me." Fear and hope warred within her. "Daniel, you don't have to say anything now," he interrupted gently. "I know you've built walls for good reasons. I'm just asking for a chance to show you that not everyone leaves, that some things can last." Abigail shook her head, pulling her hands away. "Don't make promises you can't keep. Nothing lasts forever." "I don't believe in forever," she added, the words catching in her throat. "I've learned that the hard way." Daniel's gaze was steady, determined. "Then let me show you." Before she could respond, he pulled her close again, his kiss more urgent this time, as if he could convince her through touch what words couldn't express. Despite herself, Abigail responded, her arms winding around his neck as something long dormant awakened within her. When they finally separated, she was trembling. "Good night, Daniel," she whispered, then fled up the stairs to the safety of her room. Sleep eluded her that night. Her mind replayed every moment, every word, every touch. She'd spent years protecting herself from exactly this kind of vulnerability, this risk of heartbreak. Yet here she was, contemplating opening herself to it willingly. The next morning, Abigail was distant at breakfast, retreating behind her professional facade. Daniel respected her withdrawal, giving her the space she clearly needed. But his eyes followed her constantly, filled with a patience that both reassured and terrified her. Days passed in this strange dance. By day, they maintained a careful distance. But in the evenings, they would find themselves drawn together on the hotel's back porch watching the sunset. In the parlor discussing a book they'd both read, walking the quiet streets of Silver Creek under the stars. Each night ended the same way, with kisses that grew increasingly difficult to end, and Abigail ultimately pulling away, retreating to the solitude of her room to wrestle with her fears. Daniel accepted the position with the mining company. He moved from the hotel to a small house on the edge of town, but still came by daily, ostensibly to discuss security matters with various guests. A month after their first dinner together, Silver Creek held its annual Founders' Day celebration. The entire town gathered for a picnic and dance in the meadow outside town. Lanterns hung from trees, a platform was erected for musicians, and tables groaned under the weight of food brought by every household. Abigail wore her best dress again, with wildflowers in her hair. Daniel's face lit up when he saw her approach. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, offering her a glass of lemonade. Mr. Hamlin insisted the hotel be represented. It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it. As the sun set and the music began, Daniel held out his hand. "Dance with me." She should refuse. Dancing with him, here in front of the entire town, would make whatever was happening between them public, real. She took his hand. They moved together as if they'd been dancing for years, her hand in his other hand resting lightly at her waist. The fiddle played a slow, sweet melody as they turned beneath the lantern light. "You're thinking too much," Daniel murmured. "Someone has to," she replied, but there was no bite to her words. He spun her gently, bringing her back into his arms. "What are you so afraid of, Abigail?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. "Isn't it obvious? You'll leave. Everyone does." I'm still here. For now, Daniel stopped dancing, leading her away from the crowd to the edge of the meadow where they could speak privately. You know what I see when I look at you? He asked, his hands framing her face. I see a woman so afraid of losing that she's forgotten how to live. You've built walls so high that nothing can hurt you, but nothing can reach you either. Tears stung Abigail's eyes. That's not fair. Maybe not, but it's true. His thumb gently wiped away a tear that escaped. I love you, Abigail Morgan. I think I've loved you since you bandaged my shoulder that first week and scolded me for being reckless. She stared at him, heart pounding. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. His eyes never left hers. I love your strength, your intelligence, the way you care about people even when you pretend not to. I love how you organize everything into neat columns and rows, as if you could make the world make sense that way. More tears fell, and Abigail made no attempt to stop them. I can't do this, Daniel. I can't love you and then watch you leave. Then don't watch me leave. Watch me stay. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. I was going to wait for the right moment, but maybe there isn't one. Abigail's breath caught as he opened the box, revealing a simple gold ring with a small diamond. I'm not asking for forever, he said softly. I'm just asking for today and tomorrow and as many days as we can have together. I can't promise I'll never die or that nothing bad will ever happen. But I can promise that as long as I have breath in my body, I will never willingly leave you. Abigail stared at the ring, her heart warring with her head. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to protect herself from the inevitable pain of loss. But another voice, one she'd silenced years ago, whispered that perhaps the joy would be worth the risk. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I know, Daniel took her hand. Being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing it anyway. Abigail looked up at him, this man who had somehow slipped past her defenses and into her heart. Ask me properly, she whispered. Joy bloomed across his face. He knelt before her, still holding her hand. Abigail Morgan, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on us, on building something together, however long it lasts? For a moment, she saw all possible futures stretching before her, the safety of isolation, the risk of love. The choice was hers. Yes, she said, the single word breaking the chains she'd placed around her own heart. Yes, I'll marry you. Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with such tenderness that Abigail felt something inside her heal. A wound she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was there. When they returned to the dance, hand in hand with her ring catching the lantern light, a murmur went through the crowd. Mr. Hamlin was the first to approach, his face split in a wide grin. About time, he said, clapping Daniel on the shoulder. Your father would be proud, Abigail. The celebration turned into an impromptu engagement party as word spread. Women, Abigail barely knew, hugged her. Men shook Daniel's hand. For the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, Abigail felt part of the community, connected to the life of the town. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church on the hill. Abigail wore her mother's locket and a new dress of ivory satin. Daniel's sister came from Kentucky, bringing with her family photographs and stories that made him blush and Abigail laugh. Their home became the small house Daniel had rented, expanded with a second bedroom and a proper kitchen. Abigail continued working at the hotel, now as the manager since Mr. Hamlin was considering retirement. Daniel's position with the mining company provided stability and purpose. Slowly, day by day, Abigail allowed herself to believe in the life they were building. Each morning she woke beside him was a small miracle, each shared meal and quiet conversation a reminder that she had chosen love over fear. There were difficult moments, of course. The first time Daniel was late returning from an inspection of a distant mine shaft, Abigail paced their home in terror, certain he'd been killed. When he finally arrived, delayed only by a lame horse, she alternated between furious tears and desperate embraces. "This is why I didn't want to love anyone," she sobbed against his chest. "This fear of losing you." Daniel held her close. "But would you trade what we have to be free of the fear?" She looked up at him, this man who had become the center of her world. "No," she admitted. "No, I wouldn't." As months turned to years, Silver Creek grew and prospered. The railroad came through in 1887, bringing new opportunities and connections to the wider world. Daniel and Abigail grew too in confidence, in love, in their commitment to each other, and the community they now called home. In the spring of 1888, Abigail discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled her with both joy and terror. Bringing a child into the world meant creating another bond that could be broken, another heart that could be lost. "What if I'm not a good mother?" she asked Daniel one night as they sat on their porch watching the stars. "What if something happens to the baby? Or to you? How would I go on?" Daniel took her hand, placing it over her still flat stomach. "You would go on because that's who you are. You're the strongest person I know, Abigail. But you won't have to do it alone. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Their daughter, Elizabeth, was born in the winter of 1889, a tiny, perfect being with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined chin. Holding her for the first time, Abigail understood that love wasn't a finite resource to be guarded, but an endless well that grew deeper with each person who entered your heart. As Elizabeth grew, so did Silver Creek. The town built a proper school and Mr. Hamlin finally retired, selling the hotel to Abigail and Daniel. They renamed it the Morgan, expanding it to include a restaurant that quickly became known as the finest dining establishment between Tucson and Phoenix. Their son, James, arrived in 1892, completing their family. The children filled their home with laughter and chaos, toys and books scattered across surfaces that Abigail once would have kept meticulously ordered. On their 10th anniversary, Daniel took Abigail back to the meadow where they had danced on Founder's Day and he had proposed. It was winter now, the ground covered in a rare dusting of snow that made the desert landscape look almost magical in the moonlight. 10 years, he said, pulling her close against the cold. "Did you ever think we'd make it this far?" Abigail smiled up at him, at the familiar lines around his eyes and the silver now threading through his dark hair. "Honestly, no. I was certain something would take you from me. And now," she considered the question seriously, "now I know that nothing is certain. You could still be taken from me tomorrow, or I from you. But I also know that wouldn't erase what we've built, what we've shared." Daniel brushed a snowflake from her cheek. "That sounds suspiciously like believing in forever, Mrs. Blackwood." Abigail laughed, the sound carrying across the silent meadow. "Perhaps not forever, but I believe in enough. We've had more than enough love to last several lifetimes already. And we're just getting started," he promised, pulling her into a kiss as soft and encompassing as the snow falling around them. As they walked home arm in arm, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a frightened, grieving young woman convinced that love only led to pain, to a wife, mother, and businesswoman with deep roots in a community she cherished, Daniel had kept his promise. He had shown her that while nothing might last forever in the literal sense, love could endure through hardship and change, growing stronger with each challenge overcome, each joy shared, each moment cherished. At home, they found their children still awake, excited by the rare snowfall. Elizabeth, now 9 and serious like her mother, was reading to 5-year-old James, who was more interested in pressing his nose against the window to watch the snow. "Can we go outside, Papa?" James asked as they entered. Daniel looked to Abigail, who nodded. "Just for a few minutes. It's a special night." They bundled the children in coats and scarves, then stepped back into the magical stillness of the snowy night. James immediately began trying to catch snowflakes on his tongue, while Elizabeth carefully constructed a tiny snowman on the porch railing. Daniel wrapped his arm around Abigail's waist as they watched their children. "Regrets?" he asked softly. She leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her shoulder. "Not a single one." The woman who had once said, "I don't believe in forever," looked at her husband, her children, the life they had built together, and understood at last what Daniel had been trying to show her all along. Forever wasn't about time, it was about love that changed you so completely that its imprint remained, whatever might come. And in that moment, under a sky full of stars and falling snow, surrounded by the family she had been brave enough to let herself love, Abigail Blackwood finally believed.